afternoon. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Jes Delos Santos. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today. All right, the bellwether index managing to stage a recovery this Thursday after that early morning slide that we witnessed in the day. Even the index, of course, inching lower to 7,200. But as you can see in this chart right here, the local bourse managing to end the day edging higher by 0.4% to 7,273.15. This as worries over the detection of the British variant in the country has already eased. In fact, you have Astro del Castillo of First Grade Finance saying that after that knee-jerk reaction to the detection of the new virus strain, attention of the public or investors at least has already shifted to the government's progress in securing COVID-19 vaccines. And in fact, we already have a lot of developments on that front. For one, the country has finally granted its first emergency use approval for a COVID-19 vaccine. That is, of course, for Pfizer BioNTech's shots. According to vaccine czar Carlito Galvez, Pfizer shots may be the first to arrive in the country come February. That will be through the World Health Organization-backed COVAX facility. On the table are as much as 40 million doses. Likewise, you have China's Sinovac, which has already applied for emergency use approval, but the FDA is still keen on getting more clinical trial reports, especially on phase 3 trials. Recall that Brazil, in its latest test, says that Sinovac's vaccines have yielded a modest 50% efficacy once mild cases were included in the trial. At the same time, another development when it comes to vaccines, you have AstraZeneca. A second wave of deals for securing AstraZeneca shots has been secured. You have 39 LGUs and 300 private firms inking today a second deal with a vaccine maker that's going to be for 17 million doses. Recall that back in November, an initial deal was already signed for 2.6 million doses worth 600 million pesos. However, of course, AstraZeneca's emergency use approval or EUA is still up for review over at the FDA. Now, let's take a look at how some of our leaders and laggards did perform for today. You have the likes of Globe proving to be the day's biggest gainer here, up 4 1/10%. That is more than any full day gain that Globe has witnessed or at least has experienced since May 29 last year. One of their units, of course, Asecom, has already launched its first subsidiary unit. They are eyeing an 11 billion peso market. Other than that, you have other gainers here, the likes of SM Prime, which was up 1 3/10%, as well as JG Summit, as you can see here, ending the day in the positive territory, close to 3%. The biggest contributors to the gain of the PSEI, at least on Thursday. A number of financial players as well, as you can see here, ending the day in the green, the likes of Security Bank, BDO, and Metro Bank. In fact, if we try to zoom out and take a look at the sectors here, it would prove that the financial space is leading the charge here for the index. The counter is up 1 3/10%, followed by services, which is up 1 2/10%. Only the industrial space, the loan counter in the negative territory here, inching lower by 0.7%. In fact, you have lots of development here for the financial space. BSP Governor Ben Diokno says that he sees no emerging risks that may pose problems to the banking industry. Diokno said the central bank is all eyes on the financial system to determine potential threats. He says there's no problem moving forward, noting that the sector remains sound and well capitalized despite setbacks arising from the pandemic. Recall that the BSP slashed rates by 200 basis points in 2020 and also cut the reserve requirement ratio of banks. Now, Diokno says that these moves, along with other measures implemented, helped the BSP release 2 trillion pesos into the financial system. He said the central bank was one of the earliest to actually respond to the pandemic. And this year, Diokno says the BSP is ready to deploy more economic support measures, including budget support to the national government. Now, he said the government can still tap as much as 280 billion pesos in loans from the BSP. Diokno also said there's still room for targeted fiscal measures. Now, moving on to another specific stock, this time telco giant PLDT, they are stepping up their security efforts against online child exploitation, with the younger population shifting to digital learning amid the pandemic. PLDT did say that they are going to build up their network capacity and test additional technologies that would block child pornographic content online. Now, Philippine Star reports that the group is also expanding its intelligence source on domains with such kind of content. The telco company is applying to be a member of the UK-based Internet Watch Foundation, which is dedicated to eliminating online child sexual abuse content. Now, PLDT has said that they have so far taken down over 3,000 sites hosting sensitive content involving children as mandated by the National Telecommunications Commission. But there are other things we have to be taking a look at and how it might move auto stocks tomorrow. This came after trading close. You have vehicle sales for the month of December falling by 18.1% year on year. In the month of December, that's around 27,596 units sold for the month. Month on month, though, that's a 19.1% increase. That is also the highest level since February last year, before the lockdowns were imposed in the country. Major drag coming here from the commercial vehicle side. It is sales down by 23.1% compared to passenger vehicles, somehow only sliding by 5% for the month of December. Now, all in all, vehicle sales plunged by 39.5% in 2020 to just 223,793 units sold. That falls short, of course, of their 240,000 target for the year 2020. Now, looking back again as to how some specific stocks are performing, let's take a look at GT Capital here. Before that vehicle sales figures were released here, GT Cap already ending the day to be the worst performer. They are down 2.6%. Let's see how this bit of news is going to move the stock as trading resumes tomorrow. Now, here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Peso investment pledges fell to a 14-year low in 2020, with the pandemic weighing down further investor risk aversion. Philippine Star reports that investment pledges were down 19% year on year to 95 billion pesos. That's the lowest since 2006. This falls below PEZA's 100 billion peso projection for the pandemic year and is a third straight year of decline. The agency said it remains optimistic this year, even as it braces for the impact of Create Bill on ecozones and investments. PEZA has opposed the measure, saying the rationalization of fiscal perks may drive away investments. Former Finance Undersecretary and now NEDA Acting Chief Carl Kendrick Chua begs to differ and is urging for the immediate enactment of the measure. Now, lower rice imports is also seen this year, with higher local output expected and amid continued volatility in global market prices. Philippine Star reports that rice imports will likely reach 2.3 million metric tons this year from the 2.5 million metric tons imported in 2020. This is based from a report of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This year's projection has already been revised downward from an earlier outlook of 2.6 million metric tons. Local production is expected to slightly rise to 12 million metric tons due to better yields. Despite this, the Philippines is still expected to continue being a large rice importer. That's according to a report by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Again, lots of strands coming in today on the vaccine front, the biggest of which, of course, is the granting of EUA for Pfizer BioNTech shots. Question now is, do we have everything figured out financially? To talk about that, we have Finance Assistant Secretary Paola Alvarez. Good afternoon. Asec Alvarez, great that you could join us this afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
All right, so if I have my research correct here, the vaccination program for the country requires 82.5 billion pesos. Majority of that is going to be funded via unprogrammed appropriations at around 70 billion pesos. That's mainly from loans with multilaterals. That so far has only amounted to 62.5 billion pesos coming from the ADB, the AIIB, and the World Bank. Where then will the other 7 billion pesos be sourced from?
Yes. So actually, what we're doing now is we're coordinating first with the DOH and the chief implementer on the number of vaccines that we actually need. So as of now, we are procuring 148 million dosages, and this is to inoculate around 50 to 70 million Filipinos. Because again, we have to take into consideration that the vaccine has not yet been tested on minors, so we will not be including minors in the test in the number of people to be inoculated. Now, for the 7.5 billion, we're still looking into other sources, like you have your LGUs now who are already allocating budgets. So for the remainder, we are looking into how we can tap LGU resources, local banks like government financial institutions like the Land Bank, the DBP, and other financial institutions, as well as the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Has there already been any commitments from local banks, the likes of the DBP and Land Bank?
We don't have any commitments yet, but they are of course on standby. And rest assured that both banks have given their commitment that in case the government needs them, then they will actually commit to help the government fund the vaccine procurement.
Okay, you did mention earlier the goal is to inoculate around 57 million to 60 million Filipinos, at least those aged 18 and above. If I'm not mistaken, Secretary Sonny Dominguez did already come up with a computation, at least he bared it, saying that, it's going to amount to 1,300 per person. That's going to cover doses, syringe, storage equipment, among others. How did you come up with this computation? And we do know that COVAX facility is going to offer vaccines at a cheaper price, but isn't 1,300 extremely low considering that it's going to cover a wide array of services here?
Okay, so the product cost for COVID-19 vaccines based on published rates range from around $5 to $19.50. Now, if you multiply that or divide it by the total number of the people that we aim to actually inoculate, then that is that's where the computation the secretary is basing his facts. So aside from that, we are still awaiting from the COVAX facility, because the COVAX facility is actually a separate facility. So that's an additional 40 million doses on top of those that we're already procuring. So our goal here is to inoculate the first 20% of the population, which comprises your health frontliner healthcare workers, your indigent senior citizens, your at-risk senior citizens, the rest of the senior citizens, and your other uniformed personnel. So that's where he bases most of his computations.
But at the same time, if you try to take a look at the commercial value of some of these vaccines, some of them would actually amount to more than 1,300 pesos. So how then do you try to figure to factor that in with that 1,300 peso computation per person?
Yes. Okay. So for the COVAX facility, they are assuring us that they would be providing the most efficient vaccine that would be available. So separate from that, we also have negotiations, which we are being assisted by our multilateral development partners. So part of those negotiations is, of course, the price and the overall value in terms of logistics, in terms of storage, and in terms of all the other administrative costs that would be incorporated for the whole rollout of the vaccine.
Mhm. Now let's move on the discussion this time around to economic chacha. Of course, that's being pushed for in Congress. You now have Secretary Dominguez even voicing support for the economic amendments to the Constitution. He is the first in the administration to actually do so. If the Philippines does open up to more foreign investments, what's the assurance here that there will be strict regulations in place?
Okay, so what the secretary vetted his support for is the opening up of the economy, except for ownership of land.
Mhm.
So, in terms of, for example, public utility definitions, I think there are already on pending bills in both houses of Congress. in order to streamline how we can actually attract better foreign direct investments. So there is also the updating of your foreign investments negative lists, and explicitly only targets equity investments in the Philippines and exempts the practice of professions. So these are still um, restricted only to Filipino citizens. Aside from that, for example, other utilities like energy transmission, these are things that we actually need in terms of foreign direct investment. So we hope that they could also open those up. And there are already pending legislations in terms of these areas. So in terms of actually enforcing the regulations, I think we already have laws in place that implement those, but are too strict. That's why we are hoping that the legislature, both houses, actually take into consideration the opening up of these areas, so we could increase our productivity as well as the foreign direct investments in the country.
And then let's move on over, Asec Alvarez, to discussions on food supply here. Particularly, you have Hill Beltran calling on the Department of Agriculture to actually re-strategize their food program to stabilize prices. What needs to be done here?
Okay. So we actually commend the Department of Agriculture for their efforts to digitalize the agriculture production framework. So, for example, they have e-binhi or other electronic means to distribute rice seedlings to our farmers. So, aside from that, I think what Undersecretary Beltran was calling for was the looking into on how other provinces that are not mostly affected by typhoons, by floods, could help supply the gap or the loss in production that was realized due to the back-to-back typhoons that the Philippines actually experienced. So I think this is more on planning ahead, and the DA has actually been doing this. In fact, they have been working with the DOST in order to better map out through digital platforms and satellites which areas should be planted with rice and when, depending on the changing climatic cycles. So as you can see, we are now experiencing more typhoons towards the latter part of the year. So this means that the DA has to reprogram the calendar of planting and harvest. So I think it is in these areas that the undersecretary was referring to.
Okay, so it's all about reprogramming and re-strategizing when it comes, of course, to crop proposition here. Now let's take a look at 2021. How are things looking for the finance department? What's your outlook for the year?
Okay, so for 2021, the DBCC has actually revised their forecasts in terms of inflation and in terms of growth rate. So previously for 2020, the DBCC assumption was that 2 to 4% inflation rate for this year and for the next year. So in terms of the economic impact, actually the GDP growth rate assumption for 2020 has been adjusted to negative 8.5 to negative 9.5%. So this is because of the prolonged imposition of the quarantines in various regions of the country. However, we've actually seen growth during the third quarter, and we're quite optimistic for 2021. So the GDP growth is now projected to bounce back to reach 6.5% to 7.5 in 2021. And
How much of that Asec hinges on vaccine rollout?
Sorry?
How much of your growth prospects for 2021 hinges on the rollout of the vaccine program?
I think the DBCC has actually based their assumption on the opening up of the economy, and we're not quite sure yet if the rollout of the vaccine has already accounted for. Because as of now, the earliest I think that the producers can actually roll out or deliver vaccines from their factories is around late February to early March. So I think another adjustment after with the actual delivery would be done as well.
All right, so that's something we have to look into, or at least look forward to once vaccines are in. Let's see how that is going to affect the country's growth prospects as well. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Assistant Secretary Paola Alvarez of the Finance Department.
Thank you and good afternoon.
And those are the biggest news this trading day, January 14, 2021. Catch Business World live again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I'm Jes Delos Santos. We are One News.